Jake Morrison stood at the bridge window of Terra's Edge, watching the stars blur past as his ship moved through space. He had been a commander in Earth's fleet for 12 years, but he still felt small when he looked at the endless darkness around them. Humans had only been traveling between stars for 30 years, and everyone in the galaxy knew they were the newest and weakest species out there. The message had come 3 days ago from the Zephyrian Empire. Jake read it again on his datapad, still not believing what it said. The Zephyrians were one of the most powerful groups in the galaxy, controlling hundreds of worlds and commanding respect from every other species. They were inviting Earth to send representatives to their homeworld for something called the Sacred Feast of Honor. Dr. Lisa Carter walked up beside him, holding her own copy of the message. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms, and she looked worried. Lisa had studied every known species in the galaxy, and she knew the Zephyrians better than anyone else on the ship. "Jake, I've been reading more about this feast," she said quietly. "It's not what we think it is." Jake turned to look at her. Lisa was usually calm and scientific about everything, but today her voice had an edge to it. "What do you mean?" "The Sacred Feast of Honor happens every 5 years. All the major species send their best ships and their most important people. But here's the thing, it's not really a feast for the guests." Jake frowned. "Then what is it?" Lisa pulled up a hologram from her datapad. It showed pictures of the last feast from 25 years ago. Jake could see representatives from dozens of different alien species, all dressed in their finest clothes, all looking nervous and afraid. "Look at their faces," Lisa said. "These aren't people going to a celebration. They're going to bow down to something that scares them." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Ben Hayes, their communications officer, spoke from his station across the bridge. "Commander, we're getting another message from the Zephyrians. This one has more details about the feast." Jake walked over to Ben's station. The young officer had been part of Jake's crew for 3 years, and he was good at his job. Ben could speak 17 different alien languages and understood their cultures better than most humans. "What does it say?" Jake asked. Ben looked uncomfortable as he read from his screen. "It says we are honored to be invited to witness the glory of the 3 sacred war gods. It says we should bring gifts worthy of their divine power and prepare to show our proper respect to beings who have conquered 1,000 worlds." Jake felt his stomach drop. Gods. The message was talking about actual gods, not just powerful leaders or ancient heroes. He looked back at Lisa, and she nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that," she said. "Jake, the Zephyrians don't just worship these war gods. According to my research, these beings actually exist. They're real physical creatures that show up at the feast every 5 years. Every species in the galaxy believes they're actual gods." Ryan Brooks, the ship's chief engineer, had been listening from his station. He was a practical man who fixed things with his hands and didn't believe in anything he couldn't measure with his tools. "Come on, Doc," Ryan said with a laugh. "Gods? Real gods that show up to dinner parties? That sounds like something out of a children's story." Lisa walked over to Ryan's station and showed him the hologram. "Look at this footage from the last feast. Tell me what you see." Ryan studied the images carefully. His smile faded as he looked at the pictures. They showed 3 massive figures standing in the center of a huge arena. Each one was at least 30 feet tall, made of what looked like living metal and crackling energy. Around them, thousands of aliens were on their knees, offering gifts and tribute. "Okay," Ryan admitted. "That's pretty impressive, but impressive doesn't mean they're really gods." Kate Phillips, the ship's security officer, joined the group. She had been in the military longer than anyone else on the ship, and she knew how to spot danger from a mile away. "Whether they're gods or not doesn't matter," Kate said. "What matters is that every major species in the galaxy believes they are, and they're all terrified of them. If we show up and don't play along, we could start a war with half the known universe." Jake looked around at his crew. These were good people, smart people, and they were all worried. He understood why. Earth had barely managed to build a handful of ships that could travel between stars. If the galaxy turned against them, humanity wouldn't last long. Ben spoke up again from his communication station. Commander, there's more to the message. It says the feast will begin in 7 days and attendance is mandatory for all civilized species. The word mandatory hung in the air like a threat. Jake had been in enough fights to know when someone was giving him an order disguised as an invitation. How long until we reach Zephyr Prime? Jake asked his navigator. 6 days at our current speed, sir. Jake nodded and made his decision. We're going. We don't have a choice. But I want everyone to study everything we can find about these war gods in this feast. I want to know what we're walking into. As his crew went back to their stations, Jake stayed at the bridge window watching the stars. Something felt wrong about this whole situation. In his experience, when someone invited you to dinner and called it mandatory, you weren't really a guest. You were either the entertainment or the main course. Deep in his gut, Jake had a feeling that humanity was about to find out which one they were supposed to be. The amphitheater on Zephyr Prime was bigger than anything Jake Morrison had ever seen. It stretched for miles in every direction, with stone seats rising up in circles around a central arena. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds filled the massive space, all dressed in their finest clothes and carrying elaborate gifts. Jake walked with his small crew through the crowd, feeling very out of place. The other species were impressive to look at. There were the tall, blue-skinned Andromedans with their flowing robes. The crystalline Vortons clicked and chimed as they moved, their bodies catching the light like living diamonds. The massive, Ursoid delegate stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick fur and wearing armor made from rare metals. Then there were the humans. 5 people in simple uniforms carrying a basic metal container that held their offering. Jake could see other species looking at them with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Everyone knew humans were the weakest race in the galaxy. Lisa Carter stayed close to Jake, her scanner hidden in her sleeve. She had been taking readings since they arrived, and her face showed concern. Jake, she whispered, the energy readings here are off the charts. Whatever's about to happen, it's going to be big. Ryan Brooks carried the container with their gift. Inside was a simple meal from Earth, beef stew that had been simmering for hours, fresh bread that Kate Phillips had baked that morning, and an apple pie that smelled like home. It wasn't much compared to the golden statues and precious gems that other species brought, but it was honest food made with care. Places, everyone, announced a tall Zephyrian official. His voice echoed through the amphitheater using some kind of sound technology. The sacred feast of honor begins now. All species will show proper respect to the 3 who rule war. The crowd fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Jake felt his heart beating faster as he looked around at thousands of faces filled with fear and awe. Then the gods appeared. They didn't walk into the arena or fly down from above. They simply materialized in the center of the space, as if reality had bent itself to make room for them. 3 massive figures, each one 30 feet tall, stood before the assembled crowd. The first god called itself Chronaxis. Its body looked like living metal that flowed and shifted, with eyes that burned like stars. Energy crackled around its form, and when it moved, the ground shook beneath everyone's feet. The second was Devastator, made of what looked like black stone and red fire. Its voice sounded like thunder when it spoke, and its presence made the air itself feel heavy and dangerous. The third god, Void Reaper, was the most frightening. Its body seemed to be made of space itself, dark and empty, with points of light moving through its form like distant galaxies. When it looked at the crowd, people trembled and looked away. "Behold," Chronaxis said, its voice carrying easily across the massive amphitheater, "we are the eternal. We are the unconquerable. We are the gods of war who have brought order to 1,000 worlds." The crowd responded as one, dropping to their knees and pressing their faces to the ground. All except the 5 humans, who remained, standing and watching with interest rather than fear. Ben Hayes was doing something with his small communication device, hidden behind his back. He caught Jake's eye and nodded slightly. He was picking up signals, electronic transmissions being sent to the gods during their grand speeches. Kate Phillips noticed something else. "Jake," she whispered quietly, "watch how they move." Every gesture is exactly the same as the last time they did it, like they're following a script. Lisa's scanner was working overtime, hidden in her sleeve. The readings she was getting made no sense. These beings gave off energy signatures, but they were regular and predictable, like machines rather than living creatures. "Citizens of the galaxy," Devaster announced, "you come before us to show your submission and offer tribute. Each species will present their gifts and acknowledge our eternal rule over all things." One by one, species approached the gods. The Andromedans brought a statue made of pure energy that floated and danced in the air. The Vortans offered a crystal that sang beautiful music. The Ursoids presented weapons forged from metal that came from the core of their homeworld. Each time, the gods accepted the tribute with the same words, the same gestures, the same responses. It was like watching the same scene play over and over again with different actors. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Jake stepped forward carrying the container with their simple meal. The crowd watched in fascination and horror. What were these primitive humans thinking, bringing food to gods who could destroy planets? "We are humanity," Jake said in a clear, normal voice. No special formal language. No trembling with fear. Just a man talking to three very large beings. "We brought something from our world to share." He opened the container and the smell of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie filled the air around them. Several aliens in the crowd made surprised noises. This wasn't tribute. This was just dinner. "We thought you might be hungry," Jake continued, still speaking in the same casual tone he would use to talk to anyone. "It's been a long day for everyone." For the first time since they had appeared, the three gods paused. Their programmed responses seemed to stutter. They had speeches, ready for worship, for fear, for tribute, but no one had ever offered them a simple meal before. Void Reaper leaned forward, and for just a moment, Jake could swear he saw confusion in those galaxy-filled eyes. "You offer food?" "Well, yes," Jake said. "Good food, made with care. That's what we do when we want to welcome someone." Lisa's scanner nearly overloaded with readings. In that moment of confusion, when the gods' responses faltered, she detected something incredible. Circuit patterns, data streams, processing delays. These weren't gods at all. They were machines. Very sophisticated machines, but machines nonetheless. And like all machines, they could break down when they encountered something they weren't programmed to handle. Something like humans who refused to be afraid. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light. Humanity had insulted the war gods. They had offered food instead of proper tribute. They had shown no fear. They had spoken to the gods like they were talking to neighbors. Within hours of the feast ending, every major news network in known space was broadcasting the same story. The primitive humans from the small blue planet had committed the greatest act of disrespect in galactic history. The Zephyrian High Council was furious, and they demanded immediate punishment. Admiral Susan Grant received the emergency transmission while she was eating breakfast at Earth Defense Command. She was a tough woman who had worked her way up from pilot to admiral over 20 years. She had fought pirates, negotiated with hostile aliens, and kept Earth safe when nobody else could. But she had never faced anything like this. "Admiral," her aide said, rushing into her office, "we have a problem. The Zephyrian Empire just declared that the war gods are coming to Earth to punish us for our disrespect." Susan put down her coffee and looked at the message on her screen. The language was formal and threatening, but the meaning was clear. Three beings that could destroy planets were heading toward Earth, and they were angry. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Our long-range sensors show 3 massive energy signatures leaving Zephyr Prime. At their current speed, they'll reach Earth in 18 hours. Susan nodded and stood up. 18 hours to prepare for gods. She had faced worse odds before, but never against enemies that other species considered immortal. "Get me Danny Moore from Tech Division," she ordered. "And tell Colonel Amy Roberts to ready all ground forces. Also, send word to every ship we have in space. I want them back, here as fast as possible." Within an hour, Earth's defense network was buzzing with activity. Ships that had been exploring distant systems turned around and raced home. Ground-based weapons were powered up and aimed at the sky. Satellites were repositioned to provide better coverage. But Susan had a different plan in mind. Danny Moore arrived at the command center carrying 3 large computers and enough cables to power a small city. He was young, smart, and had a habit of solving impossible problems by thinking about them in ways nobody else considered. "Danny," Susan said, "I need you to tell me everything we know about these war gods. Not the religious stuff, the technical stuff." Danny set up his computers and began pulling up data from Terra's Edge. Dr. Carter had transmitted all her scanner readings before Jake's team left Zephyr Prime. The information was limited, but it was enough to start working with. "Admiral, these readings are fascinating," Danny said, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "Look at these energy patterns. They're regular, predictable, and they repeat in cycles. That's not how living beings work. That's how machines work." Susan leaned over his shoulder to look at the data. "You're saying these gods are actually robots?" "Very advanced robots, but yes. And here's the interesting part. They seem to respond to command signals. Dr. Carter detected data transmissions going to the gods throughout the ceremony. Someone or something was controlling them remotely." Susan smiled for the first time all day. Robots she could deal with. Gods were impossible to fight, but robots had weaknesses. "What happens if we flood them with conflicting command signals?" she asked. Danny's eyes lit up. "Theoretically, their systems would overload trying to process contradictory orders. They might shut down or at least become confused enough that we could study them better." "Do it," Susan ordered. "Prepare every transmission station on Earth to broadcast noise at those things when they arrive." Meanwhile, Colonel Amy Roberts was preparing the ground forces for a very different kind of battle. Amy had been a soldier for 15 years, and she knew that the best way to defeat an enemy was to understand them first. "Listen up," she told her officers. "These things that are coming aren't gods, no matter what the aliens think. They're machines, and all machines can be broken, studied, and taken apart. Our job isn't to worship them or run from them. Our job is to figure out how they work." She pulled up a hologram showing the 3 war gods based on the images from Zephyr Prime. "Look at these beings. They're big, they're powerful, and they're designed to make people afraid. But notice something. They're also designed to be impressive. All that glowing energy, all those dramatic movements, that takes power. Lots of power. And where there's power, there are power sources that can be disrupted." One of her captains raised his hand. "Colonel, what if we're wrong? What if they really are gods?" Amy looked around the room at her soldiers. These were good people who trusted her to lead them safely through impossible situations. "Then we're about to become the first humans in history to have a serious conversation with actual gods. Either way, we're going to learn something interesting." Back in space, the 3 war gods moved toward Earth with steady determination. Chronaxus led the way, its metal body reflecting starlight as it traveled. Devastor followed, leaving a trail of red energy behind it. Void Reaper came last, its dark form barely visible against the black of space. They had done this journey many times before. Some species fought them with weapons that could destroy moons. Others tried to hide on distant planets. A few attempted to negotiate or beg for mercy. All of them eventually submitted and acknowledged the gods' power. But Earth was different. As the 3 beings approached the small blue planet, they began receiving something they had never encountered before. Thousands of conflicting signals from the planet's surface. Radio waves, television broadcasts, internet data, and military. Communications all mixed together in a chaotic stream of information. For the first time in their long existence, the war gods felt something like confusion. Their programming told them to destroy the planet and punish its inhabitants. But the flood of signals was making it hard to think clearly. On Earth, Danny Moore watched his computers work. "Admiral, it's working. Their approach speed is dropping. Whatever we're doing, it's affecting them." Susan Grant stood at the window of the command center watching the sky. In a few hours, Earth would face 3 beings that had never been defeated. But for the first time since this whole thing started, she felt confident. Humanity might be the youngest and supposedly weakest species in the galaxy, But they had one advantage that no other race possessed. They had never learned to be afraid of things just because other people called them gods. The first war god arrived at Earth just as the sun was rising over North America. Chronaxus materialized in the atmosphere above New York City, its massive metal body gleaming in the morning light. Every news camera on the planet turned to watch as the 30-foot giant descended toward the city. But something was wrong. Instead of the smooth, controlled descent that billions of aliens across the galaxy expected to see, Chronaxus was moving, in jerky, uneven patterns. Its usually perfect form flickered and stuttered, like a broken television trying to display a clear picture. Danny Moore watched from his command center, his computers working at full power. "Admiral, the signal jamming is working better than we hoped. Look at this. Its movement patterns are completely disrupted." Admiral Susan Grant studied the readings on her screens. The war god that was supposed to be an unstoppable force of destruction looked more like a confused machine trying to follow too many instructions at once. "What's it doing now?" she asked. "It's trying to land, but our signals are interfering with its navigation systems. It keeps receiving conflicting commands about where to go and what to do." Below in New York City, something unprecedented was happening. Instead of running in terror like every other species in galactic history, people were gathering on rooftops and in the streets to watch. News reporters were broadcasting live from the scene. Emergency crews were setting up barriers and directing traffic around the landing zone. Paul Williams, a maintenance engineer for the city's power grid, was watching from his office building when Chronaxus finally managed to land in Central Park. The impact knocked down several trees and created a crater 20 feet deep, but Paul wasn't impressed by the show of power. "Look at that thing," he said to his coworker. "It's leaking energy all over the place. Those connections are completely unstable. No wonder it can barely walk straight." Paul had spent 15 years fixing broken equipment, and to his trained eye, Chronaxus looked like just another machine that needed repair. A very large, very dangerous machine, but still just a machine. The war god stood up in the crater and tried to speak. Its voice was supposed to boom across the city with divine authority, but instead it came out broken and distorted. I am Chronaxus, destroyer of error. I bring judgment to." The voice cut out entirely for several seconds, then returned with a different tone. "Please stand by. Rebooting. I am Chronaxus, destroyer of worlds. You will submit to my—" The speech cut out again. Paul Williams grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward the park. Meanwhile, the second war god, Devaster, was having similar problems over the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Nick Palmer, a quantum physicist working at a research station in Hawaii, was watching the god try to fly in a straight line and failing badly. "Fascinating," Nick said to his colleagues. "Look at the energy readings. It's drawing power from somewhere, but the source keeps fluctuating. It's like watching a car run out of gas in slow motion." Nick had spent his career studying energy patterns, and what he was seeing didn't make sense if these were truly divine beings. Gods shouldn't need external power sources. They shouldn't have energy efficiency problems. They shouldn't run out of fuel. "I think I know what's happening," Nick said, pulling up his data on a large screen. "These things are powered by belief, not in some mystical way, but literally. They've been collecting psychic energy from worshippers for thousands of years, and that's what keeps them running." His assistant looked confused. "But how does that help us?" Nick smiled. "Simple. Humans never believed in them to begin with. We're not generating the fear and worship they need to function properly. They're starving." The third war god, Void Reaper, was discovering this problem firsthand. It had appeared over London, expecting to see millions of people bowing in terror. Instead, it found a city that treated its arrival like any other news event. Traffic reporters were giving updates on road closures caused by the giant floating figure. Weather forecasters were discussing how its presence might affect local temperatures. Children were pointing at it from their bedroom windows and asking their parents why the big robot looked so sad. Colonel Amy Roberts had positioned her teams around all three gods, but not to fight them. Instead, her soldiers were studying them, taking measurements and collecting samples of the energy and metal fragments that were falling off their deteriorating forms. "Roberts to all teams. She spoke into her radio. Remember, these are not enemies to be destroyed, they're equipment to be salvaged. Treat them like any other piece of broken machinery. Her teams responded with professional efficiency. When pieces of Chronaxus's armor fell off, engineers gathered them up for analysis. When Devastator's energy system sparked and smoked, technicians took readings and began figuring out how the power systems worked. The turning point came when Void Reaper, the most powerful of the three gods, attempted to destroy downtown London. It gathered what remained of its energy and prepared to unleash a blast that should have leveled several city blocks. Instead, nothing happened. The war god tried again, its form flickering with effort. Still nothing. A small crowd had gathered, below to watch, and someone in the crowd started laughing. Then someone else joined in. Soon dozens of people were laughing at a being that had terrified the galaxy for millennia. "Is it broken?" a child asked her mother. "I think so, dear," the mother replied. "Maybe someone should call a repair service." The laughter spread through the crowd, and then through the television broadcasts, and then across the entire planet. Humanity was laughing at their supposed destroyers. For beings that were powered by fear and worship, laughter was the most devastating weapon imaginable. One by one, the three war gods began to shut down. Their energy levels dropped to critical levels. Their movements became slower and more erratic. Their voices faded to whispers. Commander Jake Morrison, watching from Terra's edge as it orbited Earth, spoke to his crew. Well, that was easier than expected. Ryan Brooks, the engineer, was grinning from ear to ear. "I told you they were just machines. Very impressive machines, but still just machines." As the sun set on Earth, the three beings that had ruled the galaxy through fear for thousands of years lay motionless on the planet's surface. Not destroyed, not banished, not defeated in glorious battle. Simply turned off, like any other piece of equipment when it stops working properly. And across the galaxy, billions of aliens watched in stunned silence as the weakest species in known space accomplished what no one else had ever managed. They had made gods look ordinary. 3 months after the war gods fell silent on Earth, another invitation went out across the galaxy. This time humanity was doing the inviting. The message was simple and direct. All species were welcome to attend a feast on Zephyr Prime in the same amphitheater where the sacred Feast of Honor had taken place. The message promised answers, food, and a new understanding of recent events. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every major species in the galaxy sent representatives. They came not out of religious duty or fear, but out of desperate curiosity. How had the weakest race in known space defeated beings that had been unstoppable for thousands of years? Marcus Stone stood in the kitchen beneath the great amphitheater, putting the finishing touches on the most important meal of his life. He had been the head chef aboard Terra's Edge, but now he had a much bigger responsibility. He was preparing dinner for representatives of an entire galaxy. The menu was unusual, to say the least. The main course was a stew made using metal refined from Chronaxus's armor as the cooking pot. The vegetables had been grown in soil enriched with processed fragments from Devastator's energy core. The bread was baked in ovens powered by Void Reaper's quantum processors, which had been converted into highly efficient heating elements. For dessert, Marcus had created something never before seen in galactic history. He had taken the memory cores from all three war gods, the crystalline structures that contained thousands of years of stored experiences, and ground them into a fine, sparkling powder, mixed with earth honey and formed into delicate cookies. Each bite would let the eater experience brief flashes of the gods' memories. "Chef Stone," his assistant called from across the kitchen. "The guests are starting to arrive." Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and smiled. "Then it's time to serve dinner." Above in the amphitheater, thousands of beings took their seats. The same stone circles that had once hosted ceremonies of submission now buzzed with nervous conversation. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy had come to see what humanity had to say. Commander Jake Morrison walked to the center of the arena, the same spot where the war gods had once stood. He carried no weapons, wore no fancy robes, and spoke with no special authority. He was just a human being with something important to explain. "Thank you all for coming," Jake said, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. "I know many of you have questions about what happened to the war gods. We're here to give you answers." Dr. Lisa Carter joined him in the center, carrying a portable display unit. With a few button presses, she projected a three-dimensional image of Chronaxus's internal structure above the crowd. "These beings that you worshipped as gods were actually machines," Lisa explained in simple, clear language. "Very advanced machines, built by an ancient species that vanished long ago, but still just machines." The crowd erupted in shocked voices. Andromedans clicked their tongues in disbelief. Vortans chimed in confusion. Ursoids roared in anger. The idea that their gods had been artificial was too much for many to accept. Jake raised his hand for quiet. "We know this is hard to believe. We have proof." Ryan Brooks wheeled out a cart containing pieces of the deactivated war gods. Circuit, boards, power couplings, memory storage units, and processing cores were laid out like parts from any other complex machine. "These components are thousands of years old," Ryan explained, "but they follow the same basic principles as any other, computer or robot. They were programmed to appear divine, to inspire fear and worship, and to maintain control over the galaxy through intimidation." Ben Hayes stepped forward with his communication equipment. "We detected the control signals during the feast. Someone was sending commands to these machines throughout the ceremony. Every word they spoke, every gesture they made was being controlled remotely." Dr. Nick Palmer appeared with his energy readings. "More importantly, we discovered how they stayed powered for so long. They were feeding off the fear and worship of every species in the galaxy. The more you believed in them, the stronger they became." "But humans never believed," Jake continued. "We had no reason to fear them because we didn't grow up with stories about their power. To us, they just looked like very large robots that were having technical difficulties." Marcus Stone emerged from the kitchen with his servers, carrying the first course of the meal. The smell of perfectly cooked food filled the air, but many in the crowd were too stunned to notice. "The species that built these machines called themselves the architects," Lisa said, bringing up new images on her display. "They created the war gods to maintain order in the galaxy by keeping everyone afraid and obedient. When the architects died out, the machines kept running their programming automatically. As the servers distributed the food," Jake continued the explanation, "for thousands of years your civilizations have been living under the control of empty machines following ancient orders. You've been afraid of ghosts in the machine." One of the Zephyrian representatives stood up, his blue face pale with shock. "If this is true, then our entire religion, our whole way of life, has been based on a lie." "Not a lie," Jake said gently. "Just a misunderstanding that lasted a very long time." The meal progressed through several courses, each one prepared using components from the former gods. As the representatives ate, they began to understand the message. The beings they had feared for millennia were now literally nourishing them. Finally, Marcus brought out the dessert course. The crystallized memory cookies sparkled like tiny stars on each plate. These contain the actual memories stored in the war gods' databanks, Lisa explained. "When you eat them, you'll experience brief glimpses of what they recorded over the centuries." One by one, the representatives tasted the cookies. Their eyes widened as they experienced flashes of memory from across the galaxy. They saw their own ancestors before the gods arrived, living freely and exploring the stars. They saw the first appearance of the war gods and how quickly entire civilizations submitted. They saw thousands of years of unnecessary fear and limitation. And elderly Vortan delegate began to weep, its crystalline body chiming with sorrow and relief. "We could have been free all along." Jake nodded. "And now you are. The galaxy belongs to all of us equally. No more gods, no more masters, no more fear." As the feast ended, representatives from dozens of species approached the humans with requests. They wanted to learn Earth's technologies, share their own knowledge, and work together as equals for the first time in galactic history. The war gods' technology became the foundation for a new age of cooperation. Their advanced systems were reverse-engineered and shared freely among all species. Trade routes opened between worlds that had never spoken to each other. Scientific discoveries accelerated as species combined their knowledge. Children across the galaxy grew up hearing new bedtime stories. Instead of tales about fearsome gods who demanded worship, they heard about brave humans who looked at the impossible and decided to fix it instead. In the kitchen of the great amphitheater, Marcus Stone cleaned his pots and pans, including the ones made from reformed god metal. Tomorrow he would cook breakfast for a delegation of young scientists from 12 different worlds, all working together on projects that would have been forbidden under the old system. He hummed an old Earth song about freedom as he worked, the same tune that would soon be heard on worlds across the galaxy, sung by voices that had never known such hope.